Hey guys, I'm Georgia and welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome. Today I want to share with you the details of a Jane Doe case from Hillsborough, North Carolina. So if you're from the state or the general surrounding area, please make sure you pay extra close attention to this one and share it with others who also live in the area. As always, if you do have any tips you would like to share, contact information for the relevant authorities will be in the description box down below. This is the story of the Hillsborough Jane Doe, or the New Hope Jane Doe. She's known by both names across the internet. It was the 19th September 1990, so just over 32 years ago, when a three-person inmate work crew discovered a body just beyond the New Hope Road exit on the Interstate 40 in Hillsborough, Orange County, North Carolina. The crew had been picking up rubbish on the side of the road when they spotted the body just feet from the eastbound guardrail, approximately 15 feet down an embankment. Newspaper articles from the time tend to say that the body had been there for about 7 days at the time of discovery. However, more recent reports tend to say she was there from 4 to 6 days, with Doe Network saying 3 to 6 days. An article from the Daily Tar Heel at the time states that no identification was immediately established as they were hindered by the severe decomposition of the body. However, Doe Network states the following. She was a white female, estimated age 14 to 25, although the Sheriff's Office says she was likely on the lower end of that spectrum, 5'3" to 5'5" and 105 to 115 pounds. She had strawberry blonde hair but it had been dyed that colour. Naturally, she was a brunette. It was shoulder length with layers and appeared to be frosted, which is a highlighting technique. Her eye colour remains unknown. She had very well manicured hands and she had a 3-inch scar on her lower right abdomen that came from an appendectomy. She showed no signs of childbirth or any previous breaks or fractures, and she had negative toxicology results, so she wasn't drunk or on drugs. Her wisdom teeth had not yet come through and she had 3 fillings. Her 2 front bottom teeth also slightly overlapped. Jane Doe's dental charts are available for comparison and they do have DNA as well. However, Jane Doe was eventually cremated and her ashes were scattered at sea. I think that's just what they do in North Carolina with unidentified people. So if this DNA taken all those years ago is found to be insufficient for DNA profiling, as we know happens all too often, there's no other options to obtain it in this case. So we've just got to cross our fingers that they are able to eventually get something from this DNA. Doe Network states her cause of death as homicide by strangulation. The general picture her body gives to us is that she might have had money before she died. Not necessarily super rich, but she had enough money to afford to have her hair dyed and highlighted and her hands well manicured. This was somebody who clearly cared for herself and for her outer appearance. If she was towards the younger end of the spectrum, this might have been family money, or if she was a bit older, she might have had a job that allowed her to pay for these things herself. If she was homeless or a runaway, she certainly hadn't been for too long. She also had people who at some point provided dental care for her. She had fillings on some molars that would have come through around the ages of 6 or 7, but she had cavities on the ones from 12 to 13. This would suggest that as a young child, at the very least, she had somebody providing her with this care, whether that's a loving family or maybe she was in foster care. The body was partially clothed in a sweatshirt, bra and socks at the time of discovery. The sweatshirt was bright pink and had 3 bunnies on the front, 2 bunnies on bicycles and 1 on a unicycle. This does strike me as potentially a children's item of clothing, but despite investigation by both the FBI and the NCIS, they were never able to track exactly where the sweatshirt came from. However, back in 2018, a couple of people on web sleuths did actually manage to track down the artist behind the shirt. This was a man called Jim Benton who did these kind of bunny sketches. In the early to mid-80s, he reportedly worked at a Screen Preen t-shirt shop in Michigan, and it seems that this particular design came from around 1983. Could this possibly have been one of the sweatshirts he printed at this shop? Maybe this could signify that Jane Doe might have come from Michigan, but for all we know, this item could have been second-hand. You could have picked it up in a thrift shop. It's not necessarily a signifier of anything, but it is still interesting to ponder on. Another poster on Web Sleuth has stated that they discovered the sweatshirt was sold at 2 fairly large stores at Sears and Montgomery Ward, but obviously I'm personally unable to fact check that. I'm just taking that at their words. Jane Doe was wearing a size 34 bra made by a company called Warner and white anklet socks that were said to be clean on the bottom. This is very interesting as she clearly hadn't been walking on these socks outside. For whatever reason, her shoes had been removed. They weren't found with the body, but it's not known if this was before or after her death. Had she maybe been killed inside somewhere and therefore wasn't wearing her shoes because she was inside? Or did the killer remove her shoes after the fact and take them as some kind of trophy? We'll explore this a little bit more later in the video, but it was determined that the Jane Doe was killed at another location before being simply dropped down the embankment by her perpetrator, so her shoes were probably taken off before then. Her shoe size was approximately a 6 to 6.5. In terms of jewellery, Jane Doe was wearing a thin yellow metal ring on her left ring finger and a thin twisted metal bracelet on her left wrist. She had no other personal items on her. Despite her half-dressed state, I couldn't find any other information as to whether or not she'd been sexually assaulted by her killer. In the immediate days following Jane Doe's discovery, investigators focused on following through on several leads of missing people. They decided very early on that the woman was probably not a student at the local University of North Carolina, as no students had been reported as missing. Orange County Sheriff Lindy Pendergrass said to the Daily Tar Heel, "It could take weeks to identify the body, and then she may never be identified. If she's from out of state, another faraway state, or even next door, the way people travel these days, it's possible somebody could be lost, period." Honestly, that's not the kind of thinking you want to see in the early days of investigation like this, just negativity immediately. But Pendergrass did say that they were going to continue investigating every lead they could until they got an identity. He said that anyone with any information should get in contact, and that's a sentiment that still stands today. Like I said, contact information will be in the description box. A Facebook post from the Orange County Sheriff's Office from September 2020 states that investigators nowadays believe that Jane Doe was likely a runaway. A witness came forward to say that they'd seen a woman matching Jane Doe's description walking along the Interstate 85 near North Carolina 62 near Ramada Inn. Two other witnesses believe they'd seen her getting in and out of tractor trucks at a truck stop in Alamance County, just off of Highway 62. However, they weren't 100% positive about the identification, they just remembered the pink sweatshirt with the rabbits on front. It's believed that she might have been trying to hitch a ride at the truck stop, but when she failed to get one, she started walking. And it was at some point on or shortly after this walk along the Interstate 85 that she met the person who would end her life. Another theory could very well be that she was in sex work and she was working at the truck stop where she was seen. Very much could explain why she was hopping from cab to cab. I'm unsure if investigators asked around at the truck stop, but even if they did, I can't see any truck drivers admitting to using her services if they did. There was a fairly big lead in this case a couple of months after her death, with the suspect being found in the form of a 33-year-old man called Keith Allen Brown. He was arrested at his home in November 1990 and charged with the murder of 28-year-old Kathy Clark Fogelman. Her nude body was found in a rural area of Guilford County 3 days after she'd gone missing after getting into a taxi to head to a nightclub. This was just one county over from Orange County where Jane Doe had been found. If you can hear purring, my cat's just come to join me. I'm sorry if that's annoying. The autopsy found that Kathy had died of injuries after a vehicle ran over her chest, and she had probably been sexually assaulted before she died. However, Brown was only charged with murder. It was believed that he was the taxi driver who had picked her up. It would turn out that Brown had been charged twice previously with rape, although in one case he was acquitted and the other was dropped in exchange for a plea to other charges. As well as Kathy's murder at this time, he was also questioned in relation to the death of Pamela Hoy, who'd been missing since the July, and her body had been found just 1 day after Kathy's, lying only 500 yards away. Now this could have been a coincidence, as Pamela was found fully dressed and her cause of death was not the same. She might have been strangled. But regardless, what are the chances of these bodies being found so close together so quickly? Brown was also questioned about the murder of New Hope Jane Doe, to which he originally did not admit or deny involvement, and 2 days later he was officially named a suspect in her case. Turns out Brown had been granted licence as a taxi driver in August 1990, so just 1 month before Jane Doe died. If she had been searching for a lift on the side of the road that day, she probably wouldn't have believed her luck when a taxi driver turned up to help her. In 1992 though, Brown would end his own life by suicide. He always denied any involvement whatsoever in Pamela Hoy's death, and her own husband would later be a suspect. But Brown refused to confirm or deny, both in regards to Kathy and Jane Doe, which could say a lot in itself. But Brown isn't the only suspect in this case. In 1995, Sean Patrick Goebbel came to the picture, somebody I spoke about in depth in a previous video of mine about the unidentified serial killer Dr. No. Goebbel is one of the main suspects in the Dr. No case. In 1995, truck driver Goebbel confessed to the murders of 3 sex workers, Brenda K. Hagee, Sherry Manser and Alice Haynes. Brenda was abducted, raped and strangled by Goebbel, who dumped her body in Virginia along an access road to I-81. Sherry was also strangled, her body dumped along I-40. And Alice was smothered to death before again being dumped along I-81. Although only ever convicted of those 3 murders, Goebbel is suspected of being responsible for multiple other killings across multiple states. There are clear similarities there between his MO and the death of Jane Doe. And he was also found to have a large collection of women's shoes. Remember that Jane Doe was found shoeless. I originally theorised when I was first writing the script that Jane Doe had got into Goebbel's truck either for sex work or to hitchhike, and that's where her life came to an end. But then I realised that Goebbel didn't actually become a truck driver until 2 years later in 1992. Now this throws a bit of a spanner in the works, but this clearly was a murderer of a man. There's every chance that Goebbel's murders began before his truck driving days. However, the way that Jane Doe's body was found does lead people to suspect that she might have been thrown out of a moving vehicle and behind the guardrail. It seems she rolled quite far down the embankment. This is a lot more likely to happen if she was in a truck, thrown or pushed from higher up. It likely would have been easier for her to fall behind the guardrail instead of in front of it. If her body was simply placed behind the guardrail by the perpetrator, would she have fallen and rolled down the embankment so far? Would the perp have taken the risk on the side of a very busy highway? Was it Goebbel, or was it any other truck driver that she might have crossed paths with that day? Both of the men I've mentioned here are very viable suspects in this case for different reasons, but as we sadly know all too well, there's no shortage of men out there wanting to bring harm on young girls, especially girls and women in vulnerable positions such as new Hope Jane Doe, especially if she was a sex worker or homeless or a runaway. The latest forensic reconstruction in this case is from Carl Kopperman back in 2018, so share this photo on screen currently far and wide. If you're listening to this via my podcast, then please just go and Google New Hope Jane Doe so you can see a photo of her face. But we won't know how true to life this is until she's identified. Like I said earlier in the video, she was severely decomposed. She just looks so young in this reconstruction. I don't know if it's the bunny sweatshirt or if she just was young, but it hurts to know what she went through before her death. She might have just been a teenager. Of course, it's not any less sad if she was in her mid-20s towards the later end of the spectrum, but there's just something about the idea of children being in this situation that is so heartbreaking, isn't there? Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope my very purry cat on my lap hasn't been too annoying. I'm hoping that's not going to ruin the audio too much. I tried closing the door at one point, but instead she just stood outside the door yowling at me instead, which was much more annoying than a few purrs. So, there you go, now she's going to leave. Sorry, did I annoy you? Anyway, thank you for tuning in today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.